Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. All of you have joined us live for this broadcast as we talk about sexual violence before and during COVID-19. And we are honored this afternoon to be hosting Cynthia Mbamalu, whom we're going to have this conversation with. But first, to tell you who Cynthia is. Cynthia is a dedicated human rights, gender activist, and development practitioner, a lawyer by profession with an LLB in Comparative Constitutional Law from the Central European University, and she specializes in legislative advocacy, human and women rights advocacy, youth leadership development, constitutional building and elections. She is currently engaging the process of constitutional review in Nigeria for a gender-sensitive constitution that guarantees women's political inclusion. As a co-founder of Yaga Africa, she has dedicated the past 13 years to development work, specifically targeting the building of sustainable democracies, promoting inclusive and human rights based approach. She currently serves as a director of programs for Yaga Africa. Cynthia provides mentorship to young female politicians and young women under different initiatives. She has participated in several election observation missions and studies internationally and locally. She currently leads the Watch the Vote project, which is a data and tech-driven movement of citizen observers committed to promoting electoral integrity and playing a critical role in Nigeria's elections. She's also a current member of the advisory board of Amnesty International in Nigeria. And we are very honored today to be having her to be part of this conversation. Cynthia, welcome to Distinct Talks today.
Thank you. Hello, Africa, and hello to the rest of the world.
Thank you very much for sparing the time to be with us. And we know that you're part of an amazing group of Nigerian citizens that have been running a campaign to call for a state of emergency for gender-based violence. And I just wanted to throw out a couple of statistics and also quote two of your Facebook posts to put us to perspective. Child sexual abuse in Nigeria is an offense under several sections of Chapter 21 of the country's criminal code, and the age of consent in Nigeria is 18. UNICEF reported in 2015 that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 10 boys in Nigeria had experienced sexual violence before the age of 18. According to a survey by Positive Action for Treatment Access, over 31% of girls said their first sexual encounter had been rape or forced sex of some kind. And I know you're part of this amazing group of people that are pushing for a state of emergency for GBV. One of your quotes says, "Declare a state of emergency for gender-based violence. We want a safe Nigeria for women and girls. Stop raping our children. Rape is a crime. Rapists are criminals. Prosecute and convict rapists and stop the violence against women." And the other quote that you put recently in one of your Facebook posts says, "Still on the matter of sexual and gender-based violence, every child deserves to be protected. Every woman deserves to feel safe in our society. Until every state adopts laws protecting us from violence and protecting the rights of our children, we won't stop. Until we have a system that guarantees there is justice for survivors of rape, we won't stop demanding for state of emergency gender-based violence in Nigeria. Call your state representative in government. It is time for action, not empty promises. Rapists and abusers are roaming free." Cynthia, the statistics look bad for Nigeria and of course many of other African countries. Just paint for us a picture of what is it like? How is sexual violence in Nigeria as it is right now?
Thank you so much, Emmy. It's actually a worrisome case, because what we have seen is now, before the COVID, we already had a major challenge when it comes to sexual and gender-based violence in Nigeria. Now, with COVID-19 pandemic, what we saw was an increase in reports of sexual and gender-based violence. So, for instance, with the lockdown order, we said there were more cases or reports of gender-based violence. One, most women were experiencing lockdown with the abusers at home. Then there was also increase in rape. And let us also remember that with the COVID-19 with the lockdown orders to prevent the spread of COVID-19, what this meant was restriction of movement. And the government, at the initial stage of planning, failed to adopt a gender-sensitive strategy to address COVID, to respond to the crisis. Now, what that created was a situation where survivors of violence could not access response or prompt response to their situation. And we start seeing more abusers living with impunity because your victim couldn't report or go out. And even for organizations working to respond to gender-based violence, most of them were restricted. And one of the demands then was for issues of gender-based violence to be elevated to an essential issue, so that they would be granted access to move and respond to reports of violence from different locations. Now, so what we saw was with COVID, there was an increase. Now, the protest in Nigeria some weeks ago, sadly, a young girl, Uwa, was killed and was raped and murdered, brutally murdered in a church in one of the states in the south. It's called, I'll call it the South region of Nigeria, Edo State, South region of Nigeria. Not so long ago, we had another young lady in the southwestern region who was also raped and killed at her home. Now, within the period of just from January to February, by the time we started tracking reports just on media platforms, there were over hundreds recorded. Now, with groups working on cases of sexual-based violence, you hear several groups in different states, they're releasing their reports. One of the states had over 1,000 reports. If you calculate what the reports we had gotten from January to July and to June, the Nigerian police actually last week released a statement saying they had received 617 cases and they were addressing or attending to those cases. Now, these are just numbers, meaning that we actually have much more, because let us bear in mind that most of these cases are not reported because of the fear of stigmatization. And so what we have actually are cases we can track on media reports, social media platforms, and then those that were reported to the police, and then for groups working on gender-based violence, those who got direct reports. So we still do not have an accurate database of that, but the numbers are already, if you want to put it together from January to the first week of June, it was already alarming. So for us, it was a matter of an emergency. And so if you see, the protest in Nigeria was demanding for a state of emergency. Why is that important? Because you read out the data. 1 in every 4 women have experienced violence. In fact, a report in 2018 shows that 1 in every 4 women has experienced sexual violence from intimate partner or intimate relation. So sometimes it's even within someone we know, our loved ones, our fathers, brothers, boyfriends, uncles. So you could see the reports were just alarming. And then what got more worrisome was also the number of cases of children being raped. Just last week, there was a report of a 3-month-old that was raped in Nasarawa State. That's a state in north central Nigeria. 3 months old. Not long ago, in the group I belong to, one of our team, one of our colleagues working on these issues, just 2 nights ago, actually, had to respond to a case of a 4-year-old being raped in one of the communities in in Abuja, the capital. So you see, almost every day we have reports. Now, what the challenge is, the government has remained silent. So it's almost like with the increase in cases of rape, we had a silent state until the protest started, and we said we need a state of emergency on sexual and gender-based violence, because enough is enough. Now, why do we need a state of emergency? Because one, we have laws. Now, aside from our obligations, that's Nigeria's obligations to international instruments or human rights instruments, committing to protect or prevent violence against women and girls. We have all these commitments. However, the problem has been with the domestication of these laws and adoption at state level. So Nigeria operates a federal system, meaning that for certain laws that are domesticated at the National Assembly, we also need state assemblies to adopt those laws for them to become enforceable at the state levels. So, for instance, the Violence Against Persons Prohibitions Act. Now, this was a law. It took almost 11 years before it was passed into law because for some reason, Nigerian lawmakers have a problem once they see a law for women. Once they see women and girls, it's almost like a red flag. And I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, our National Assembly is a male-dominated National Assembly. Out of the 109 senators, only 8 are women, and out of the 360 House of Reps members, only 13 are women. So once it comes to legislation on women, there's always a major pushback. So finally, the Violence Against Persons Prohibitions Act was passed into law in 2015. However, since 2015 that's 2015 to 2020, we still have 23 states out of the 36 states in Nigeria yet to pass that. So 23 states are yet to adopt the Violence Against Persons and Prohibitions Act at the state level. And what this law does basically provides a stronger framework for rape, both the proof of rape, both investigation and prosecution of rapists. So it gives us a stronger framework for that, and empowers institutions to take action. So when we don't have states adopting these laws, it also means there's a weak legal framework at state levels to enforce prosecution or even investigate cases of rape and give it prompt response. So that is one. States failing to adopt these laws. The other part is the Child Rights Act. Now, we have a major challenge in Nigeria because when it comes to convention around child's marriage or age of consent or age of marriage, you don't have a uniform system. Now, what the Child Rights Act seeks or sought to do was adopting a convention of the rights of the child to put the age of 18 as the age of consent, one, and also the age for marriage. So far, we still have 11 states yet to adopt these laws, and most of these states are in the northern region of the country. Now, once you don't have these, what we still have would be cases of child marriage, young girls who are sexually abused or assaulted, once the age of consent is not 18, it's easy for people to argue that sex with a minor is sex, while it should be regarded as rape. Because for me, if you're sleeping with an underage, that is rape. That is not sex. That cannot be consensual. A child cannot consent to sex. And one of our protests was, if she's not old enough to vote, she's not old enough to have sex. And let us make this clear, because these are the things we need to push out. And that is why the demand for state of emergency is that we need state governors to adopt, state governments rather, to adopt these laws at state levels and then put in the requisite institutions to address these cases. So I will move from the legal framework now to the challenge of enforcement. So we have a police, the Nigerian Police Force, which supposedly has a gender unit. Now, the gender unit was created to address or attend to these special cases. But what do we have? Is one, within the institution, that unit has been underfunded. They do not have the requisite capacity to engage, and you have better engagement at the national, so more in the federal capital and states like Lagos. But once you go down to other states, these units are ineffective. So what you have, you go to report cases of rape, is treated with such levity, is as if it's not an issue. So you do not even have prompt response. Families who go to make reports do not have confidence that the cases will be addressed. Most times the victims are made fun of. Stories you get, some of the reports, is frustrating and annoying that a state institution will belittle reports of rape. So that is one. And so if you look at the Owas case, the young girl that was killed in the church, it took protest before the police could address the public. Now, when they went to report this case, the police officers had asked the family and friends that came to make the report to provide them with money that's to help them move. Asking you, so I come to report and you're asking me for money to fuel your vehicle to go and respond to the issue. And that was just one case. This is the reality. Just 2 nights ago on Twitter, a video of a young woman she took her baby, her child was raped in Abia State, a state in the southeastern Nigeria, and she went to the police, and the same demand was made for her that she should bring in money for them to attend to the case. And the woman was crying on the road. It took a passerby who took a video, and we put it on social media, and then advocates started on that. So most times it's almost like people need to put this on social media, make it trend, start to protest before the police will step up. So what this shows already that the police is not ready to fight or respond to these cases, or they are not properly training their staff to respond to these issues and not providing proper funding for this unit to be effective. So currently, investigation of rape cases are almost non-existent in Nigeria. In fact, prosecution and conviction is so difficult because the proof for rape has been made so difficult in the country. And until you can address that, victims or rapists and abusers still walk around scot-free. So that is one inadequate or inefficient efficiency in the response system. Same also the medical system. So most times for rape, you need to prove that there was penetration. So you go to the hospital, general hospitals, they do not have trained staff to respond to victims who come to make report, to make them feel safe first, and then the provision of rape kits that would be used for testing. And this is not just a general in different states. So the hospitals are not even properly equipped. So you see the investigation becomes so difficult because from the point of response, there's a lot of gaps, a lot of inadequacies. And then for the centers, we have several centers that serve as referral center for sexual assault in Nigeria. Most of these centers are working with independent funds or non-governmental sector. So you see the government is almost inactive in supporting these centers. And most of them do not have prosecutive powers or cannot effect arrest or prosecute offenders. All they can do is respond to the victims and the families. So already in the chain of response, there is a lot of gap. The government is failing in its duty to protect women by ensuring that laws that are in place are properly enforced. The government is failing in providing budgetary allocation because it's not enough to create a unit or create institutions. You need to properly fund them. The government is also failing to ensure that when it comes to justice system, that access to justice is not the highest bidder, but rather the access to justice is to everyone that deserves justice. So that is a major challenge. I'll just share a
Cynthia,
simple, a personal experience during the lockdown.
Cynthia.
I got. Can you hear me?
Yeah, continue,
Yes, I
continue.
can hear you.
Continue.
Yes. So a report of domestic violence, and immediately this was happening past midnight, where I live, and I was actually surprised. My sisters and I went, and we literally were banging on the door, threatening the man to open up the door. Now I called our emergency number. We have an emergency number in Nigeria, 112, and I said, I'm calling to report a case of domestic violence. We need response immediately. This was past midnight, almost 1 a.m. And then they responded saying, oh, domestic violence is not an emergency. These are gender-based violence. And I said, oh, I thought
Wow.
I was surprised. And she said, oh, if it's a robbery, we can send the team. And with the COVID, we can't start sending people to just respond to any report. And I was really amazed. And I told the lady who responded, I said, I'm sorry, this is an emergency. Can't you hear the scream? Because I was close to the door of the house and I could hear the woman screaming and shouting. And she was saying, oh, I'm so sorry. I can hear her cries. Sorry, can neighbors go in and rescue her? Maybe in the morning you can call the Human Rights Commission or you can. And I said, I have to wait all night? What if I'm a victim calling to make a report? So this is an experience for just trying to report a case. Now neighbors came in, we had to take the lady, and she actually had to sleep in my house with her babies. The following morning, did a follow-up. Now calling the NAPTIP. Now NAPTIP is an institution empowered by the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act to respond to issues of violence. So I make a call in the morning to follow up. And then the report to follow up, and then the response was, so sorry, our team just rushed to another location to respond to an emergency, and we don't have sufficient people, so you have to wait before you get a response. Now, this is just a personal experience trying to report a case. I had to finally the National Human Rights Commission stepped in, and then they had to invite the man over to their office because they also couldn't really come over. Now, that is a challenge. So imagine if I was a victim, my life was in danger, and I was calling to make reports. And you get this experience from other women, from other young girls who have gone to make responses. So what you have is basically civil society organizations taking the responsibility to go respond to reports of rape or reports of gender-based violence, and taking it upon themselves to either take the victims or survivors out of the location and looking for where to put them in. So we have some shelters. The shelters were overcrowded and filled up. No, and
Cynthia,
with COVID,
Cynthia, Cynthia,
yes, yes,
and this is an experience for you who lives in an urban part of Abuja.
in an urban, exactly,
Imagine women in rural areas, but
in
also
rural areas.
One in four girls literally means that every family or every neighborhood in Nigeria has had somebody sexually abused. Where are the leaders? What are the politicians saying? What are the religious leaders saying? Because these people go to their churches. These people come and ask for votes. What are these people saying about this situation?
Yes, and thank you for asking this question, because our political leaders have failed us. And that is why I would always say we need more women in government, because perhaps if we had more women in government, we would start having response and better response. And just a simple example, the move for the motion for state of emergency went through one of our female lawmakers. Out of the few females, they were the ones speaking up, and then we had some male champions also supporting that. So what we have so far is politicians have not taken issue of gender as an important issue. It's only used during campaigns. So political campaigns, you have campaigns saying, my government will provide to women, youths, persons with disabilities. I mean, that's a general campaign. It's a mantra. But there is no action post-elections for better structures to be put in place. And that is why there's a lot of demand at the state level, because the politicians are really not taking this case seriously. In fact, you have those who would challenge you and claim that, oh, the lady either she was dressing poorly, or she was hanging out to the wrong crowd, or she wanted it, or she was asking for it. So you have some political leaders also making jokes about this. So one of the things the movement is doing now is putting states that have failed to pass these laws into what we call the hall of shame. We keep pushing it out there, and for politicians that make nasty remarks about rape to put their names out there and start using it as a campaign agenda, because now we need to make this part of the political campaign for the next general elections, to see states that are serious and individuals that are serious about issues of gender-based violence, because that is one. The other thing is also our traditional and social-cultural orientation. We live in a very patriarchal society where there's always this issue about, when it's women's issue, women are just trying to take over, they're trying to challenge men. So it always seems to take the backstage when you talk about any issue that affects women. So that is why it's difficult to amend our constitution to provide for special rights for women when it comes to, be it an affirmative action or quota system for political inclusion, or even the passage of the Gender and Equal Opportunities Bill. It's taken us so many years, and it keeps failing in the National Assembly. So it just shows that we already have a culture of patriarchy that has enabled a lot of practices over a period of time. And most of our politicians, because they are men, very few of them, not just men, but elderly men, because within the younger generation, there's a lot more education. And that is why you would also see push for more young people to get into government, because if you have younger people in government who understand the current realities, it would also inform the policies that would be made, or even the laws that would be made. So it's just that culture of patriarchy. So our political leaders have been silent until the protest. Now we have more people speaking up. So for instance, the Speaker of the House of Reps has taken this as a serious case. Last week, he had a meeting with the speakers of the state assemblies to call for the attention on issues of gender-based violence. Also, you have some lawmakers stepping up, but a lot more needs to be done, because it's not just a one-man battle. We need our political leaders to all speak in unison. For religious leaders, they are failing. And one of the things, as a Christian, I have a problem when I go to church, and each time you're preaching about family, you're focusing on just a woman is supposed to be submissive. So all the time you preach about family and marriage, the focus is on women be submissive. There is less focus on men. You need to love, you need to protect, you need to preserve. We don't have that
And
level of
Cynthia,
focus. So our religious leaders are also
Cynthia,
failing, because they are yet to become champions. Yes.
Cynthia, and I mean, when you go to these churches, the same politicians who are policy lawmakers are given the front seat. They're the ones who sit in front of the church.
Front
They're the
seats,
ones who are
they are
praised. They're the ones
celebrated.
giving fundraising and everything. So even the religious leaders are losing the moral authority to raise these issues.
True. That and that is really the truth, because most times you actually have abusers who are in government. You have people who they have one case or the other that, and no one is holding them to account. And when they are celebrated in the churches or even in the mosque, when they are given so much respect, even victims cannot even report. Let's also not forget that we have sexual violence within the religious institutions. In the churches, there are pastors who are abusing women, there are priests who are abusing young children and women. We have that. We have imams and sheikhs, what have you, who also are abusing people, but who is holding them to account? I don't know if you followed the case last year against the pastor, one of the pastors of Koza, one of very popular church in Nigeria, when the woman shared her experience of experience of rape years ago when she was much younger, and it started to trend. But other religious leaders supported this man, and using his influence, he got the police. They even arrested the woman. And you're asking, why would you arrest someone who makes a report? Let's not also forget, even in the entertainment industry, so beyond the religious leaders, just last week, a report was made against the popular musician D'banj. Now, there's an accusation of rape. There is a process. If you challenge the accusation, you go to court, you can sue for defamation, you can sue for libel, and you can have the court processes enforced. However, this young girl was arrested, detained. It took the efforts of civil society groups to go to the rescue, called to the police to release her. And at one point, her social media was taken over, and tweets were going on her social media celebrating this said artist. Now, while this is still an alleged case of rape, however, there is a problem where individuals who make reports are arrested. It is a shame that people make reports and they are arrested, because what you have to do once a report is made, you as an individual, if you are the person being accused, you don't believe in you can actually go to court and let the court process take its course. You don't need to pay the police to go and make arrests. So we see this happening.
So essentially, the victims are getting victimized. I give a report.
Exactly.
I was raped because I'm nobody. I'm not popular. I'm not a politician.
Yes.
Then I get arrested, and then it turns against me. And I think,
yes.
Have you thought about the bigger part of the law needs to focus on providing protection to those who come and make the reports? Because if that is guaranteed, maybe you have more women who are going to come up and say, "Oh, this politician did this to me. This pastor did to me." Does the new law that you're proposing capture this part of the conversation?
Yeah, so actually, because the VAP Act was passed in 2015, there is a demand based on the resolution in the House of Representatives. There was a demand for two committees, the Women Affairs Committee to work with the Human Rights, so three committees actually, Human Rights and Justice Committee, to review the existing framework. So we have our part of our plan is to engage that process, to start pushing for reviews in the current law to protect victims who make reports. Because until we protect people who make reports, people wouldn't open up to make reports, because what we've seen is you make a report and you're victimized for that. This is not, during the lockdown, a young lady in Kogi State reported also one commissioner had picked her up, beat her up naked, they raped her and everything, and she made a report. And she was picked up. It took an advocacy from us, other groups working to go and make this a national issue, put it on media, national television, before the police could respond to that. So how many also of those who do not have access to groups to make this a social media campaign or put it on national television? What is their fate? So you make a report and then you're arrested or you're picked up for that report. So that is part of the issues we're hoping to get involved in this current review process. That part of the protection is also to individuals to be free to make reports without fear of intimidation or arrest, and that justice doesn't go to the highest bidder.
And Cynthia, and I mean, part of this conversation, part of my experience working with political parties and politicians, it's also a big problem at the national assemblies. Interns, program assistants, all these people that are working for politicians. I mean, in the US, politicians, senators are being accused of inappropriate sexual touches against their assistants. It seems to be a bigger problem that we are not even talking about. Maybe we need to find ways
Yes.
of amplifying this, find more voices and find more people and see how to protect them, because it's a big problem across the continent. And I think we need to widen this
Yes.
conversation and
We do.
serialize it so that we put it in everyone's face so that they know this is a problem. How do we deal with
Yes.
it? But
Deal
the
with
other,
it.
the other space that I also wanted you to talk about is our own organizations where we work. There are sometimes
True.
spaces where we work, and then people make these unnecessary sexual jokes, and then we take it for granted. Interns
True.
are being sexually abused, but sometimes we take it for granted. How is it? So we have talked about the politicians and the open. Have you had this in organizations, in civil society
Oh,
organizations?
very well. Actually, unfortunately, it happens even in the space where we should be protecting rights. And part of, so if I'll give an example with Yaga Africa, one of the things we had done was review, we introduced a diversity policy one, and then also working on our policy to protect our team from sexual harassment within the organization and even interacting with other partners in other organizations. In fact, as last year, one of our interns was had an experience with one very popular motivational speaker in Nigeria, and she had gone to meet with him and he had tried some funny things, even though he didn't succeed. But he had tried to touch her, and all of those very, very discomforting, let's just call them harassment, because it starts from wanting to touch you, hug you without your consent, and all of those things. And one of the things we had done was to brief our lawyer to write to him to let, because we had told team members, once you have this experience, you need to officially report so that the organization can take it up. We also need to have stronger HR system in organizations. I think more organizations need to introduce, beyond diversity policy, a sexual
Yeah.
harassment policy within the team, and do have trainings for the team. Because in 2019 we had to conduct trainings for the team. 2018 actually, for sexual, both for men and women, because both anyone could be a victim. We
Yeah.
had to get an expert to do that training, but we don't have that going in different organizations, and we need more spaces to do that. Beyond that is also making reports. There are women who, because they have made a report, have either lost their job in the civil society space or are not given grants or given opportunities to benefit in programs. So what we have, some people are being harassed until they give in before they can benefit from a particular program, be within the civil society space, even within regional institutions, as deep. I'm talking now from the African Union to ECOWAS and down, because we need to expand the conversation.
Yeah.
Harassment is going on everywhere. People are using their positions of power to intimidate and oppress other individuals who do not have that access to power. And it has been on for a while. The culture of silence has been one of the things that has been our major downfall. So we have lots of women who have experienced this, who do not share that. The other day we're having a conversation, just women, female colleagues working in the space, and you see us sharing experiences. One of my staff, she went to give documents for one of our resource persons to sign, and he was trying something funny. She immediately informed me, and we said this resource person's consultant will never be engaged on our project again. So immediately you blacklist those individuals, because once we get those reports, we don't want tomorrow to hear you finally succeeded in abusing the staff. We just blacklist you immediately. But how many different groups, very few groups, actually create an open space for conversations, and we need to start having these conversations within those groups. Those people we give awards to, once there's a report of, take those awards away from them, because most times we celebrate individuals who are abusers and who are predators and who are moving freely without anyone to hold them accountable. So that is one. The other is in politics. And I want you to share this experience, because after the 2019 elections, we met with our young women who ran for elections. And gosh, that meeting it was an eye-opener. Young females, one of our youngest female candidates, she had shared an experience. One political leader had promised to support her campaign, and then he asked for sex. When she refused, he sent in thugs to beat her up, and then she had scars to show us on her body, and she had
Wow.
to wear long sleeves throughout the campaign, because she didn't want it to stop her from campaigning. So you have women, young women, within, some of them give up their political career because of sexual harassment and abuse within the political system. So that meeting almost from the conversations, most of them had gotten a demand. It's either you sleep with me to get our support or step down, or you wouldn't get the support if you don't sleep with me or if you don't do this particular thing with me. So you see, harassment and abuse is so ingrained in our system that in every sector it is
Yes.
existing.
Yes.
And we're not doing much to address it.
And Cynthia, I think my experience with civil society is that there are also civil society organizations that are so huge that donors find them so important. Even when they tell them anything
Yes.
bad that they are doing, donors do not want to listen to this. And we've had experiences. I've met a young girl who has been inappropriately touched by a senior boss in a civil society organization. She tries to raise the alarm, and then people are asking her, who is going to believe you? And these are questions that young women keep facing every day. Now, I have another young lady that ran in the last election in Uganda. In 2016, a young lady around 28 years decides to go and run for woman MP in her district. And then there's this guy who is in his late 60s. But when she was growing up, she called this guy uncle. All her life, she kept calling this guy uncle. When it came to the time where she wanted him to be part of his campaign team, the guy was open with him and says, I need to sleep with you. And then the girl was saying, but I grew up calling you uncle. You can't be telling me you want to sleep with me. And these are challenges across. And I think we need to amplify the conversation about sexual harassment across. And then we need people who are open enough to talk about it. We need to speak truth to power. We need to speak truth to power across all spaces. And it needs to come from our organizations. The sexual violence policy, sexual harassment policy, a lot of organizations, I can tell you, across the continent, less than 1% of political parties have a sexual harassment policy. Some of them don't even know that it is necessary. And then, so these are conversations we need to push. But let's move this to the regional level. ECOWAS, East African Community, SADC. How do we introduce this conversation? What needs to be done? Because we are talking about the smaller part. The bigger the organization, the more sophisticated the sexual harassment is, because then you could lose a regional job. Then you could blackmail against your government and things like that.
Yeah, I think one part of the things we need to start having at different regional institutions, like you said, the sexual harassment and sexual abuse, sexual offenses, be it a policy or a sexual harassment policy. Now, because already we have instruments in the region, so we don't have a challenge with legal instruments in the region binding the engagement of nation states or member states. What we have are the institutions themselves. So the African Union, the SADC, ECOWAS, the East Africa. So in different regions, what we have had is within these institutions, there is no safe space for reports of abuses. Mm-hmm. And we need to start holding leaders of this institution, be it the chair, from as far top as the chairperson of the AU, down to the heads of the different regional institutions, that we must see a commitment to the fight against sexual harassment or sexual-based violence, sexual violence within institutions. By one, the policy; two, the reporting chain. Now, an effective admin and HR system is what works better, but it's not just about who. It's not just about who sits on the seat. It's about the powers of the individual to engage with persons that make reports. Because you can't keep an HR who is loyal to individuals occupying specific space and expect that HR to take up the case of a junior staff or someone who is bidding for an opportunity. What you'd have is just a system of chaos. So you need an independent institution within the institutions that responds to reports of rape, of sexual violence, and you need a gender balanced team within that independent institution. So be it an independent institution, you need a balanced team of a number that is an odd number. So preferably a 5-panel team, a 5-panel with male and female, or a 7-panel, not just about a one man or one woman thing. So you need that balance, or at least a 3-panel, because that way you reduce bias and you reduce prejudice. The other is also, I think, for young people, for younger groups engaging these institutions, we need to also support each other and collaborate with each other. Meaning that once there are reports, most times we have reports from peers or colleagues, but we just tell them, oh, the system is rotten. The rotten system cannot be addressed. I think we need to start shaming people. Once reports are made, we need to start pushing, building campaigns where we do national level campaigns, to start having country level, regional level campaigns against individuals who have been fingered as abusers or who have been identified as abusers. We need to start putting this as a major campaign. And for every engagement with these institutions, be it the African Union or the regional institutions, as for every engagement, part of the demand should be, what is your policy to protect female participants? What is your policy to protect women beneficiaries? What is your policy to protect people against sexual violence? I think if we start engaging institutions by demanding that accountability, that is one place to start from. And then creating a system for report that protects the individual who makes the report. So whistleblower policies, normally we introduce whistleblower policies for only corruption, issues of corruption or fraud. But actually, whistleblower policy should be expanded to also include reports of sexual abusers or abusers and violators. That is a policy of whistleblowing policy. Now, these days should include that, because if we don't expand the scope, what we would have is people that are afraid to report out of intimidation. And that is what we currently have, is a lot of intimidation. And once people are in a position of power, they use power to their advantage and put other people at a major disadvantage. So there's a lot going. Sex is becoming too cheap and is used as a bargaining chip, and it is frustrating to see that happen.
Cynthia, I'm listening to you, and I have 3 daughters. I have sisters. I don't even know what to tell them. I mean, a girl in Nigeria was raped in a church. I mean, this could happen to you anywhere. I don't even know what kind of advice you can tell a young woman right now to be able to protect them. Because when you go to your workplace, there's going to be a boss who is going to sexually harass you. When you go to use public transport, there's a taxi tout who is inappropriately touching you. When you go for an international conference, there's the guy who is in charge of the conference who wants to take advantage of you. I don't even know. What do you tell women? What do you tell them? What kind of advice do I give somebody to protect themselves? I'm even lost. I don't know how to deal with that.
I don't, because I always do not want to advise, because I want to focus on the rapist, the abuser. But however, we also need to advise ourselves. And maybe I'll just give an example with myself, because I've also had my own experiences. I mean, I'd had to struggle. I'm going to say this bluntly as possible. I'd had to struggle with someone for my boobs. I went for a meeting, about to leave. Guy tried to put his hand in my shirt, and I'm like, what's happening? How did this meeting get into struggling for myself and your hands trying to get into my shirt, right? And till date, I don't send female colleagues to have meetings with this. So for me, once I've had this experience, okay, this person is a red flag. I don't need my female colleagues, to be exposed to that. Because my advice is to reduce this whole culture of silence and the fear of intimidation. Once you have an experience, we need to report that. We need to report so that we can easily document and start tracking those who have lots of reports, so that we get them prosecuted. So that is one thing. First, we need to be confident as women to give out, to make reports, to share our experiences with other sisters who work in the space, because we also need to protect each other. We need to be each other's sisters' keeper. We need to protect each other from those experiences. So once I know this person has a trait, there is no way I should be able to warn other women who I know engage with him and say, hey, this guy, he has the tendency to be an abuser, if you give him the opportunity to do so. So that is one. Reporting, being open. Let us know to intimidate. Basically, say no to intimidation. Once you have an experience, even if it is just touching, what we call in Nigeria, tapping currents. You just working, someone will tap your butt or tap your boots. Report. That is inappropriate. It's not current. It's not nothing. Or try to kiss you on the cheek, or those silly things. We need to make those reports. I think the other also is we also, I don't like to say we need to be careful where we go to, because it happens anywhere. Like you said, the young lady was in the church. The 3 months old she was picked from her mother. They were sleeping, there was no power, so the woman left the door open because of the heat. And then she woke up and she didn't find her baby beside her. And she got worried and she started checking, running before she found the baby out that had been raped. Now, so this was from her home. Her child was taken. The young ladies in Ibadan were raped in their homes. One was behind her home. So it's almost like no place is safe. So telling people be careful where you go to is not an advice.
Yeah.
Rather, the focus should be we need to be more proactive in giving reports. Once we see the sign, there are signs sometimes. Once we see the signs, we need to take note of those individuals and put a red flag on them. And then identifying groups that work on these issues, so we have a clear channel of reports. Once we have reports, really, I don't want to ask, because no advice would work. People have been raped in the safest places. People have been raped even with their hijab. We have one of the girls that was raped. She wears hijab. She's properly covered. So it wasn't that she was. So it's not about your dressing. It's not about where you are. It's about the culture of individuals who feel they can abuse you and get away with it. So for me, the focus should be on the rapist, on the men. But I think I want to just add here, we
Yes.
need to raise better men. We need to raise boys to become responsible men and responsible fathers. Our society not just beyond Africa, over years, the focus had been on raising a proper girl child. You want your daughter to be the best. You raise her to be a good wife, a good mother. But let's focus on men. Simple as, if this biscuit belongs to Jane, James, do not take Jane's biscuit. If Jane does not give you her biscuit, don't take it. As simple as that. From childhood is part of, because most times the attitude that mentality of rape is that audacity that you can take what does not belong to you and get away with it, right? So we need to start raising our voice to grow into better men that would protect women. We start teaching them that, hey, you should protect your sister, you should look out for your friend, for that girlfriend, you should look out for her, that women are as equal as you are. Because if we don't even address the broader challenge of gender inequality, we will still have major challenges of sexual and gender-based violence. Because at the end, if we put this within a spectrum, why we have the culture of impunity and abuse, girls, this is beyond just rape. People are thrown acid because they said no to a proposal. People are beaten up because they refused a proposal from a guy, right? It comes from that idea that a woman cannot say no to you. So it's a broader question of gender equality in our society. So if we can start addressing the systems to ensure we have gender equality, we'll start having men who realize that, hey, the woman is not subject or is not subordinate to me. She's an equal human being the way I'm a human being. She's also an equal human being to me. And she has a right to dignity, a right to privacy, and a right as a human being who exists with me within this plane. So it's also about conversation around gender equality, because it all comes from there. Most guys do not think a woman should say no to them.
Cynthia, and I mean, it makes a lot of sense, because I agree that we focused on making sure we bring up women to be good people, and this is also reflected in the corruption cases. The reflection is that there are more men who are thieves. There are more men who are doing the bad things. But also, a lot of us young men are brought up and we are told that you must always get what you want. And the women are being told that you must be courteous, you must ask, you must request. So when we grow up as young men, we are thinking, oh, I have a right. If Cynthia says no, then I use my strength, I use my energy, I subdue her. And I think I like the entire idea that we need to start focusing on bringing up responsible men. We think that the focus is on women, but you don't expect your son to marry a woman and the woman makes him a good man. She needs to start somewhere. She needs to start somewhere, because if he's already a thug, it's going to be difficult. And I think that I like the idea that we need to come back and talk about the grooming of the young man. Who is doing it? How are we doing it? And what are we telling them? We are telling the young woman to be submissive. We are telling the young woman to be respectful. We are not telling the young man to be respectful. We are not telling the young man to request, to ask with courtesy. And I think there's a bigger conversation that we need to have. But also as we think of wrapping it up, I've had a terrible, there's been a terrible narrative, especially in this part of the continent in East Africa, where they keep thinking that those who are raping are young people who are taking drugs, are young people who are influenced by alcohol. But it doesn't seem so when we start looking at institutional level, in political party headquarters, in government institutions. The people who are doing this are senior people, respected people. So it's nothing to do with the drugs. So we have a couple of, maybe one or two people who are high and then they decide to sexually abuse. But I think we need to go away from stop saying it is drugs. It is a state of mind of young people, of men thinking that they're in charge, they're in control, and they need to satisfy themselves. But so moving forward, how do you plan to move the campaign, the state of the emergency campaign? Because you've talked about children being raped. We've talked about a young girl found in the church, young girls raped in their homes. What are you thinking? How are we going to protect these people? How are we going to make these spaces in Nigeria, in our organizations, and the rest of the continent safe for young women?
Yeah, so because for those of us working on this, we are non-state actors, meaning all we can do is advocate on the issues and protest about it or protest against the system. And this is a continuous effort, because for this time around, we're not going to stop on the engagement. So like I said, at first we had engaged with lawmakers, so there was a motion at the National Assembly, and committees given tasks to go review the laws. So we'll be engaging those committees to see following through on action to hold them responsible. The other is also the campaign against at the state levels to get states to adopt the laws at state levels. There are different groups actually. There are groups like Enough is Enough. There's the Tech NG. There are groups like STARE, Stand to End Rape, and so many other groups. There's the Dorothy Njemanze Foundation, and so many other groups actually working together with Yaga Africa and so many groups. And the idea is every group have your own line of actions. So we've been having EIE for one has been having a series of Insta Live sessions with wives of governors and for states where these laws are yet to be passed, because also need the first ladies of the states to start speaking up at the state levels. There was also a conversation with different groups working on gender issues that pushed a memo to the Governors Forum. So one of the things that we achieved with that was the Governors Forum had called for a state of emergency at the state level on gender-based violence. But we don't want this to just be, because politicians, it's easy to just say, yes, state of emergency on this, but then no action.
Yeah.
So part of what we're doing now is tracking the states to see which states would pass that. So currently in Bauchi, the VAPS Act is actually in the process of being passed. It's at the committee stage. Different other states have started introducing the bill in the state assembly. So we're tracking. So there's going to be a lot of tracking of legislative actions at the state level to be sure we have the laws first, because it's easier once you have the law, you can engage. And it's also the work engaging. So for Yaga Africa, for instance, we provide support to special committees, women committees in National Assembly. Part of what we're doing with them is gender budgeting training. And that is with the goal to ensure that by the time they begin the debate for the 2021 budget, and very soon they'll start debating for next year's budget, that part of the things these women, the committees will be pushing for is that there's specific budgets for gender issues. So basically gender auditing the budget process to ensure that we have proper budgetary allocations to institutions that are attending to issues of violence against women. Because without proper funding, they do not have the capacity to engage on these issues. So there's also that line of engagement. There are also groups like the Diary Group, led by Indicato, working with National Human Rights Commission also. And the goal is to also get the commission to become more effective. So from communication, so if you follow the commission online now, there are more videos and messages on where to make reports or what to make reports. We have them, they've been doing a 21 days protest against violence against persons. So engaging different institutions basically is ongoing now. And for the group, our goal is to work with every institution that works on women. So the National Human Rights Commission, the Women Affairs Ministry, at both the national and state levels, the Nigerian Police, and the NAPTIP. NAPTIP is the National Agency for protection of trafficking in persons. So there are also engagements with this institution. So it's a multi-pronged approach that would be in different phases. But the idea is, for now, we want to start seeing government commitments become actions that have been taken. So those are the things ongoing. However, we're still tracking reports of cases, and the different groups that provide response to victims or to reports are also still working. So you, like the case of the lady that D'banj, the popular musician, got police to arrest. It was NGO groups within the team in Lagos that actually had to respond to that and go to the rescue of the young lady. So at different state levels, once there's a report, there's a channel to identify groups working in those states to pick up those cases, and then support come from different angles. Not long ago, there was a report in Plateau State. I got the reports. I had to call a friend who works with the Commissioner of Women Affairs to also to take up the issue in Plateau State. So you see, it's like it's a network of groups working on this to consistently engage. So there are different approaches. The working with lawmakers, legislative engagement aspects, working with policymakers at the ministry, department, and agencies, then communication. In fact, part of the conversation recently is we need to provide a lot of content on messaging. We need to start pushing that information to educate the population using our different channels, social media, radio, because radio has better penetration in Nigeria, television platforms. So for every interview we get for different groups, talk about gender issues, talk about reporting channels, so that people are educated and informed that you can actually make reports. And if you're intimidated, there are groups that can fight for you. So do not be afraid to make reports.
Thank you, Cynthia. I mean, I hear part of what you talked about is people need to report abuse. Find people that you can trust and tell them your story. Don't keep quiet. We need a whistleblower law for sexual abuse, not just for corruption. We need to expand the whistleblower so that even the whistleblowers, in terms of sexual abuse, can be protected. We need sexual harassment policies, institutional level, governmental level, regional level, and at the continental level. Cynthia, your final word to the continent, final word to the women, final word to the men about sexual abuse.
One, rapists are criminals. They need to face the law. They need to be prosecuted and convicted. To women, you're not alone. You need to always remember that you're not alone. There are lots of people who are willing to help you, stand up for you, and stand up with you. So do not give up and do not let go of the fight. We need to keep fighting. And to the men, we need more male champions. We need many what we call he for, what you hear of the he for she's. We need more feminists. Feminism is not feminists are not women alone. It's the same way you say you're a Democrat, right? Or even to say you're a Christian or a Muslim. It's an identity, right? And we need more feminists that are men, because that is what, for a continent like Africa and country like Nigeria, where patriarchy is still the order of the day. We need more men speaking up. We need more men leading the movement, because men listen to men. And it's easier to have men speaking up to their fellow men. That's where we have that. So we need more feminists that are men and women. It is not the victim's fault. Let us stop stigmatization. Let us stop victimizing individuals who make reports, because it's not their fault. The fault is the system's fault, and is the rapist's fault. Let us fix the systems, and rapists will stop their act.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. It has been nice and an honor having you. We are going to keep following the conversation. I am going to dedicate the next session to continue a conversation on sexual violence from another part of the continent, because I think this conversation must be had, this conversation must be amplified, and it must be expanded. Thank you very much for your time, Cynthia, and I wish you all the best. I know that you have a male-dominated National Assembly and Senate, but I hope that they are going to wake up and support the women, because they have mothers, they have daughters, they have wives, they have female friends, and we are hoping that it's going to make a difference. I mean, your campaign is going to make a difference, and it's going to inspire the rest of the continent to rise up and ask for a state of emergency. Thank you very much, Cynthia, and have a splendid evening.
Thank you for having me. You too.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much. That was Cynthia Mbamalu, who is a dedicated human and gender rights advocate based in Nigeria, talking about sexual violence and the campaign they are running to declare a state of emergency in Nigeria against sexual, gender-based violence. We are asking the men need to join the conversation. We need to amplify this conversation. And she has proposed that we need some male feminists to be able to come on board and help, and also to stop victimizing the victims of rape. They do not cause the rape. You do not say, because of the way a woman is dressing, she was raped. No, it is a state of the mind. You need to wake up and start making the right decisions. She has proposed that we also need to start bringing up responsible young men. We have been focusing on women and telling them to be responsible, to be submissive, to be respectful. We need to change the narrative and focus on the young women. She has also talked about reporting, that if you're a young woman, you've gone through this process, you've been sexually abused, sexually harassed, or raped, find somebody to confide in. That story needs to come out. That's when you can be helped. But there are also a lot of people willing to help you if you're willing to talk about it. We need sexual harassment policies across the organizations we work with. The Christian Democratic International Center has pioneered this conversation within the institution to make sure we have a sexual harassment policy, and gives an opportunity for every staff and every person who comes to participate in its program a free opportunity and access and freedom to be able to report cases of sexual harassment. All organizations need to do this. Civil society organizations have a big problem with sexual harassment. You need to talk about this. Political parties and political institutions, national assemblies, parliaments, we've had young men, young women complaining about inappropriate behavior of politicians and the leaders that they're meant to look up to. This was a conversation about sexual harassment before and during COVID-19, and it was powered by the Christian Democratic International Center, which is a party foundation based in Stockholm, running programs in Eastern Europe, Latin America, and East Africa. As part of this conversation, as part of amplifying sexual violence across the continent, we are dedicating the next session, and we shall have a follow-up conversation about sexual violence. And this time, we shall have another guest from another part of the continent to talk about this issue. Thank you all very much for those who've been able to tune into this edition of Distinct Talks. It was a pleasure having you all on this talk, and I wish you a splendid, splendid evening.